I need you to listen to me carefully, because what I am about to say is not motivational, it is not theoretical, and it is not something I learned in a church pew. My name is Anna. I live in the United States, and for years I was involved in practices I believed were spiritual, empowering, and harmless. I am speaking now from a place I wish I had never known. There are things people are doing every single day that open doors they don't even realize exist. And once those doors are opened, something else walks through them. I used to be the one on the other side of that door. I was trained to look for it. I was taught how to recognize it, and I was taught how to use it. I did not grow up calling it witchcraft. We called it spirituality. We called it enlightenment. We called it power, intuition, manifestation, ancestral wisdom. I lived in that world openly, surrounded by people who spoke about energy, alignment, and awakening as if it were truth itself. We told ourselves we were helping people, protecting them, guiding them. But behind the language, behind the candles, the symbols, the rituals, and the affirmations, there was a legal system at work that most believers have never been taught about. And that system runs on permission. Nothing attacks without access. Nothing enters without agreement. Nothing torments without legal ground. I know that makes some people uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the sound truth makes when it collides with something you've been taught to normalize. I was trained to identify people who were spiritually exposed, not atheists, not people who openly rejected God. We were taught to watch believers. People who prayed but didn't obey. People who trusted God publicly but privately practiced other things, just in case. People who spoke life with their mouths but death with their habits. People who said they loved Jesus but still consulted horoscopes, tarot cards, crystals, manifestation rituals, psychics, or ancestral practices. We didn't force our way into their lives. We waited, because eventually they opened the door themselves and called it harmless. I am not sharing this to glorify where I came from. I am sharing it to expose what I escaped. Because there are people watching right now who genuinely love God, who read their Bible, who pray, who fast, who worship, and yet they live under constant resistance, confusion that won't lift, cycles that won't break, peace that never lasts, progress that collapses right before breakthrough. And they keep asking why. It is not because God is ignoring you. It is because something else has been given permission to interfere. Tonight, I am going to confess the 5 things we were trained to look for. 5 doors people open without realizing they are signing spiritual contracts. 5 behaviors that grant legal rights in the spirit realm. And as I expose them, I need you to listen without fear. Exposure is not condemnation. Exposure is mercy. Because the moment something is revealed, it can be revoked. Before I tell you the 5 things, you need to understand something most churches never explain clearly. The spirit realm does not operate on chaos. It operates on law. There are jurisdictions. There are boundaries. There are permissions. Even darkness must operate within rules. We were taught that we could not touch a person unless legal ground existed. And legal ground had nothing to do with how good someone thought they were. It had everything to do with agreement. Agreement can be conscious or unconscious, spoken or internal, emotional or habitual, but agreement is agreement. That is why people can love God and still be tormented. That is why prayer can coexist with oppression. That is why fasting can be followed by relapse. That is why worship can feel powerful one moment and blocked the next. Because 2 authorities were never meant to occupy the same territory. In the occult, we were trained to listen more than we acted. We studied language. We watched patterns. We paid attention to what people consumed, what they tolerated, what they defended, and what they refused to let go of. Those things revealed who truly had authority in their life. You don't give permission only through rituals. You give permission through alignment, through repetition, through affection, through trust. The first thing we looked for was anyone seeking power without submission to God. This was the most common door and the easiest to exploit. People wanted results more than relationship, answers more than obedience, control more than surrender. They prayed, but they also manifested. They trusted God, but they also spoke things into the universe. They believed in Jesus, but they believed their words alone created reality. We were taught that when a person separates power from submission, they become exposed, because all power comes from somewhere. And if it does not come through obedience to God, it will come through another source. Manifestation culture is not neutral. Visualization rituals are not harmless. Affirmations rooted in self-deification are not motivational. They are substitutes. And substitutes are agreements. When someone says, I don't need God for this, I can do it myself spiritually, something always answers that call. Always. At first, it feels empowering. Confidence rises. Things start working. Coincidences line up. But what follows is dependency, anxiety, pride, spiritual confusion, because borrowed power always demands payment. The second thing we looked for was entertainment that normalized darkness. Movies, music, games, shows, books that glorified witchcraft, divination, necromancy, demons, spellcasting, or spiritual rebellion. People underestimate entertainment because they don't see it as participation. But attention is agreement, repetition is alignment, and fascination is affection. We were trained to understand that spirits attach through imagery and sound. That is why rituals use symbols. That is why chants matter. That is why repeated exposure lowers spiritual resistance. When you invite darkness into your imagination, you are opening internal doors that prayer later struggles to close. People would say, it's just a show. But we knew which content increased nightmares, sleep paralysis, intrusive thoughts, and spiritual heaviness. We knew that once a person normalized it, they stopped guarding their inner world. You cannot feed on darkness for entertainment and expect light to dominate your spirit. The third door was unforgiveness, bitterness, and unresolved trauma. This one was devastatingly effective. Pain creates vows, quiet promises people make to themselves like, I'll never trust again. I always protect myself. No one will ever hurt me like that again. Those inner agreements become strongholds. And strongholds are legal structures. We didn't need rituals when bitterness was present. Trauma that was never surrendered created open loops. Rage created access. Shame created silence. And silence protected what should have been expelled. When people refused to forgive, not because they couldn't, but because they wouldn't, they didn't realize they were maintaining contracts written in pain. Forgiveness is not excusing what happened. Forgiveness is canceling access. Unhealed wounds are invitations disguised as self-protection. The fourth door was covenant mixing, and this was extremely common among believers. People wore crosses and crystals, prayed to God and consulted psychics, quoted scripture and checked horoscopes, trusted Jesus and believed ancestors guided them. We were taught that divided altars are powerful entry points. God does not share authority. When someone mixes covenants, they dilute spiritual covering. God is not one option among many. He is exclusive by nature, not because he is controlling, but because truth cannot coexist with contradiction. Every object carries agreement. Every practice carries authority. Mixing is not balance, it is breach. The fifth and final door was language. What people repeatedly spoke over themselves. I'll never change. I'm just broken. This always happens to me. I'm cursed. My family is doomed. Words are not neutral. They establish permissions,